This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal, and I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Well, Jamal, it didn't take much into this year. We're at another major crisis point. We have so many crises. We're on the verge of potentially a war in Ukraine between Russia, Ukraine, and Ukrainian proxies, NATO, the European Union, and the United States, that could lead to the biggest outbreak of war since World War II on the European continent. We're on the verge of that. We're going to be talking a little bit about the potential for war in Ukraine, the implications globally, but also for the Middle East, because it definitely has implications for the Middle East. And there's a lot to say about that because all of the proxies involved in the Ukrainian-Russian equation are also involved in the Middle East, and it'd be good to kind of unpack that a little bit. And also, we're going to talk.
It is a global impact,
Yeah, of course, and it's we have a lot to say about that, obviously, from the Arab perspective, from the Arab Talk perspective. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the asymmetry in well, this is no breaking news, right, Jamal? The asymmetry in U.S. foreign policy when it comes to expansionism, when it comes to confronting Russia, even China, but letting the apartheid state of Israel off with yet another pass as they continue their systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And, we're going to be talking about more land theft and attacks on Palestinian civilians, as well as other expansions of their apartheid practices. And if there's time left, we'll talk a little bit about the COVID pandemic, because I want to give a little antidote to some of the media that's saying, oh, things are looking better right now, but where you and I are in Northern California, it's pretty devastating. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about Russia and Ukraine, Jamal. I personally believe that we're closer to war than what many of the pundits are saying right now. And I'm kind of on the side of thinking that Vladimir Putin is not going to back down and is going to ratchet up tensions between the United States, NATO, the European Union, and Ukraine.
Well, obviously, fears of a Russian invasion of the Ukraine are growing as military buildup at the border shows no sign of dissipating, and the crisis talks remain at an impasse. Russia, they keep saying, they're talking about Putin. I think he's a very smart guy. I think you agree with me.
Yes.
And he keeps denying that they are preparing to invade its neighbor, the Ukraine, despite stationing, this is the numbers that we're receiving, around 100,000 Russian troops at various locations along the border. This is according to Ukrainian and Western officials. So we haven't.
And by
seen
the way,
the
they're on
one.
they're on three sides of Ukraine right now. So they're on the north, they're on the east, and they're on the south. So they've got either their own military in Russia, or I know they have military stationed in Belarus right now, Jamal. So they're on three sides of Ukraine.
Yeah, so he's playing the game like, we have the right to position our troops on our borders. And if you want to talk about the Ukraine, let's talk about NATO. So he's connecting, this is where he's putting Biden's back to a wall and NATO's back to a wall, the United States. And he said, okay, if you want to talk about that, let's talk about that. You have to put it in legal form. Not just like you're going to promise, we're not going to be at your borders with NATO, having the Ukraine joining, NATO.
Right.
And he wants that in legal form, saying that the United States and NATO guarantees that the Ukraine will never be part of NATO.
That's a non-starter.
That's his demand. It's a very intelligent demand. It kind of reminds me, you and I are old enough, and I remember... I don't remember it as a youngster, but I studied it in political science, right? The Cuban Missile Crisis, right? This is the example where everyone thought about, this was like political science 101. Like if you if you want to get into international affairs, that's one of the scenarios that you study. And in it, basically, it was almost the same thing. People were thinking about, oh, look at the Russians, or the USSR, of course, at the time. They're placing missiles in Cuba, but no one was talking about the United States placing missiles in Turkey. And what Khrushchev at the time, what he was playing, he wanted the United States to get rid of its nuclear missiles out of Turkey. So Americans heard half the story. I mean, it's like, oh my God, Cuba, it's like, a few hundred miles away from our shores in Florida. It's destruction. And you were here. I wasn't here in the 60s, but from what I heard, people were practicing the drills, duck and hide under your desk in it's crazy. Of course, but it's the same thing now. I mean,
but here's the difference, Jamal. One difference is Vladimir Putin is a lot smarter than Khrushchev. He's a lot more strategic than Khrushchev. And I think he's psychologically, and this is, a little bit because I do have a bit of a psychological profile on Putin. He's far more dangerous than Khrushchev ever was. And
he's the product of the KGB. He was the head of the KGB. People forget about that.
That's right. The head of the KGB, and did some ruthless things. And by the way, under the Russian regime, continues to do ruthless things against journalists and opponents of his presidency. He's president for life essentially in Russia. As you said, and I agree with you 100%, Putin's a lot smarter than all the recent memory Russian presidents, premiers, leaders. He's a smart man. He has a little bit of a Napoleon complex. I could say that because he's a pretty short guy too. I mean, if you want to look at it, he's
we shouldn't talk about
no. I mean, it's part of the psychological profile that I'm saying, because Putin does have this thing where he demands respect. He doesn't want to be looked down upon. He lives towards this fantasy of the old glory.
And he wants to reseparate the Soviet Union.
Of course.
He's not happy about this whole breakup. He wants to maybe recreate it, and starting.
That's right.
The Ukraine is a starting point. Look, I haven't been to Russia, but I've been to former Soviet kind of bloc countries like Poland and Hungary and what have you. And these countries, like starting with Poland, part of the EU now, and so forth. So the former Soviet, since he's from the former Soviet regime, he's been watching, as the years go by, not only that they have lost territory, not only that they have lost influence, but these countries are joining Western Europe rather than the Eastern Europe bloc. And the Ukraine is at his borders. There is a difference between the Ukraine and being further south. And I think that's their experiment. I think what he wants to do, he wants to see how far can he push the envelope. And if he succeeds with the Ukraine, he's going to succeed somewhere else. And by the way, how serious is this problem, Jess? Today, the U.S. State Department issued, actually on Sunday, that all U.S. citizens in Ukraine leave the country immediately.
Right.
So this is how serious it is.
Well, I think that's exactly right. But I want to remind our viewers and our listeners, in my humble opinion, I think Putin has already won this battle, no matter what happens. Let's not forget he took over Crimea. Crimea is a part of Ukraine. He is occupying Crimea right now, and did so under the Obama administration. And this is one of my biggest criticisms of the Obama administration in terms of their foreign policy. They let Putin just have Crimea. There was no real significant consequence, and they gave Putin free rein to take Crimea. And I think Ukraine and Zelensky right now, the prime minister, they're very concerned about the United States. Biden made that gaffe where he talked about, well, if Russia just
maybe if they take a little bit of the pie,
maybe a little bit,
another chunk of the pie, it's okay. Another
but
bite.
Let's remember
it's okay.
the Ukrainians are very nervous. They've lost Crimea right now. Crimea is under occupation.
Listen, the Ukrainians are begging for really military intervention. They have passed the point of sanctions, and we'll talk about that. And then here is the setback for them. Of course, Biden has not shown as any indications, like when he said, well, it depends how far it's going to escalate to, and maybe if it's a small, here and there. And then, of course, we'll talk about the Secretary of State, what he said yesterday, but also countries allied to the United States, and just give you an example, or Western countries and countries that lead the European Union, like Germany, they refused to provide Ukraine with military support. Germany said that they refuse to provide the Ukraine military support. In contrast to the US and the UK, kind of the countries that have been
it's a different
hinting that they will do this.
Right, but it's a different political calculation for all of those players.
Yeah, but listen to this. Germany not only refused, but also blocked Estonia from sending German-made weapons to the Ukraine.
Right.
So this is
and part of the
Germany is one of the
Jamal,
leadership of the EU.
Yeah, but despite what Blinken and Biden and Boris Johnson say, there is not a united front in the EU or NATO on what to do with Russia. And our listeners and viewers may not fully appreciate this, but there's a pipeline, a gas pipeline going from Russia to Germany that the Germans absolutely need.
Exactly.
And
yes.
Putin knew that when he developed this pipeline that, is going to go into Germany, and he's using that as leverage. Now, publicly, and by the way, Angela Merkel is gone, and, Germany has a new prime minister now, who is, not as tough as Angela Merkel by any stretch of the imagination. He's more left center. But I think, the fact that the EU and NATO are not fully unified on what to do with Russia already has played into Putin's hand. What Putin wants to do, Jamal, in the bigger scheme of things, he wants to divide the EU, he wants to divide NATO. And here's my breaking news for our listeners and viewers. Putin has his eyes on the presidency 3 years from now in the United States, where his buddy Donald Trump he's betting on Donald Trump coming back with a vengeance. I actually believe Putin is playing the long game. He's going to destabilize things. He's going to divide the EU. He's going to keep NATO fragmented. He's going to continue to create fragmentation here in the United States and wait 3 years. Because the
most important thing he's saying, he wants legal assurances that Ukraine will not be allowed to join.
And that's not going to happen.
To join the U.S. camp and the European military alliance, NATO.
And that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So here is a question. Could, because I keep talking about sanctions that drive me crazy. Could more sanctions deter Russia?
I don't think so. I mean, Russia is so far advanced. It's going to hurt some of the oligarchs. It's going to hurt some of the folks who have a lot of money, who like to transfer money from Russia to European banks or to the United States. I mean, to be excluded from the American or the international banking system, which means the American banking system, will be difficult but not impossible. And so I don't think the sanctions are going to hurt them that much. And
well, the sanctions that will hurt them the most if they are imposed on its key sectors like energy and finance. Actually, these are
more energy than finance,
which happen. Some of them happen, and officials not traveling here and there. Something like this that happened actually in 2014 in the wake of the annexation of Crimea from Ukraine, which, by the way, the United States and some European countries, like I want to call the entire EU, basically also imposed more sanctions in several occasions. The United States, by the way, imposed sanctions on Russia for its 2016 U.S. election interference. There were some sanctions imposed. Its role also of alleged cyber attacks against the U.S. And in 2018, the nerve agent attack in the UK.
Right.
That was also the Brits imposed sanctions, and the United States
But-
followed suit. And Russia denied all these things, but it hasn't affected. These
It
things haven't
hasn't.
affected it.
And it won't, Jamal. I don't think that the sanctions are going to do anything. And I think Putin's mentality, and I really believe this, is the long game. People are really focused on Ukraine right now. But Putin's long-term strategy is destabilization and division. And if he can accomplish that, that's going to help him, he believes, in the long run with creating a weakened EU, a weakened NATO alliance, trying to recreate the kind of glory days of the USSR, which he still, has these grand fantasies about. And I just think, we have our eye on the Ukraine, as we should, because, we want to protect allies and things like that. That's part of the U.S. foreign policy. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with everything in U.S. policy, but
the question is just, we should keep an eye on it but then the question is, why do we have to worry about the Ukraine? Why does the United States has to worry? Is the Ukraine a U.S. issue? Really, this is what people.
No, it's a NATO.
During
NATO issue.
COVID, during
right.
Look, its effect on the economy. Does the United States want to get involved in a military confrontation with Russia over the Ukraine?
I would say, I believe it's going to happen, but it's not because of Ukraine. I think the U.S. probably, in terms of the intelligence reports. And as you alluded to, and as I believe, this is part of a larger Putin strategy. And they believe, like, if Putin can conquer Ukraine, which maybe in the United States grand scheme of things, is not worth, falling on their sword for. But if it signals kind of an ongoing expansion of Putin's wish for domination in the area, I think part of the U.S. strategy is if he's able to take over Ukraine, then that's going to have a domino effect. It'll also weaken Biden. It'll weaken Boris Johnson. It'll weaken NATO. So I don't think the issue is the Ukraine per se, but it's part of this larger geopolitical domino effect that the Ukraine symbolizes or represents. If the Ukraine goes, everybody in NATO, the United States, Boris Johnson, everybody looks really weak, and, Putin has scored. I still believe, no matter what happens, Jamal, Putin has come out a winner. He's so much smarter than most people, and, you can't underestimate this man.
The way I see it today, it's the United States and the UK are the only countries, maybe, who favor interference, who favor punitive action against Russia's economy. But the rest of the European countries, I've been trying to read what the French have been saying, what the Germans have been saying. They are really hesitant. They have a hesitation because of economic and diplomatic reasons. They cite economic. You actually, it's good that you talked about the Germany and basically its gas pipeline project with Russia. I think they call it Nord Stream 2. That's a huge project between Russia and Germany, and then the rest of Europe.
That's right. That's the main gas line for Europe. The main natural gas line for Europe, Jamal. And if Russia decides to kill that, it'll hurt Russia, obviously, because, that's a big economic engine for Russia. But it would be devastating for Germany and the rest of Europe in terms of the, natural gas needs that the European Union has and needs. And so there's a lot at stake here. And to say that the UK supports this, I don't think that's entirely correct. Boris Johnson supports it, but Boris Johnson is on the ropes right now. He's in his weakest position.
He's supporting because this is a report that Biden reportedly is considering deploying several thousand U.S. troops, which I think are not enough anyway, as well as warships and aircraft to NATO allies in the Baltics and Eastern Europe. So should he continue with this plan? What's going to happen?
Well, I just want to say another thing. I mean, the Europeans, I mean, and again, just from the larger kind of historical perspective, let's not forget that during World War II, the Europeans suffered in ways that we here in the United States never can imagine suffering. We lost, tens of thousands of soldiers, no doubt that was horrific and, economic toll. But let's remember Germany, France, the bulk of Europe was bombed, destroyed, and in many cases decimated after World War II with how many thousands, tens of thousands of civilians dying in World War II, Jamal. The Europeans, in terms of their experience of war, is very different from the American experience. So there are economic reasons why the European Union may not be completely behind the United States, but there's also this historical memory of World War II. Having said all that, I think that it's 50-50 if Putin invades. I kind of think he will. My kind of feeling is that he's willing to take that risk, even if he's got 100,000 people at the various three border areas, with the Ukraine right now. He's got nothing to lose, Jamal. There's absolutely nothing.
Agree.
That Putin has to lose. Whereas the United States and Europe has everything to lose.
And talking about his memory or historical memory that you're citing, everyone loses when they try to invade Russia. And because you mentioned Napoleon tried it and failed, and then Hitler tried it and failed. So It's not easy to go into war against the Russians.
No, and listen, people are really misplaying and misunderstanding Putin. He's a brilliant tactician who's really disturbed. And the combination of being really brilliant and really disturbed is not a good combination. When you're engaged in diplomacy, Jamal, they have this term called rational actors. Are states or diplomats, are they rational actors? Will they do things that are rational? By and large, the way most of the Western world engages in diplomacy, you could say yes.
Am I to presume just that you look deep into Putin's eyes?
No, but I've looked carefully at who he is, his history. I've read and watched documentaries and read history pieces on who he was and where he came from. This guy is cold-blooded, man. He's a cold-blooded killer. He's really, really smart. People say he's the wealthiest man in the world by far, if you look at everything that he controls, and I think that's probably true. I think the United States is really, and the EU is really already lost. I think they lost with letting Putin take Crimea. The fact that that just happened and there were no real consequences, and that he's already established 100,000 people at all the borders, three of the borders with Ukraine, I think there's already war as far as I'm concerned. And whether or not they'll actually invade per se, I kind of think they will, and I think it will be devastating. But here's the thing. We know this from recent history. Who's willing to die? I don't think European troops and the European Union are willing to put their blood and treasure on the line. They're not. The Russians will. They've got nothing to lose, 100%. And if you know anything about Russian history, and I know you know this, Jamal, the Russian military are very proud. They're like really solid, when it comes to like the mentality of fighting. They may not be the best fighters, but they will fight to the death. And whether or not the Ukrainian army, which is not that good, is going to withstand.
No. The Ukraine will be run over in a matter of days. Every military analyst says the same thing.
And the Europeans are not going to step in. And the Americans
They've asked, by the way, for Patriot missiles, and they said, no, let's wait. I mean, they're very desperate. You're listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco 89.5 FM. I want to stay on the same topic, but I want to shift our attention to the Middle East, because we talked about the impact on Europe and the United States. I see a big impact on the Middle East. Like
Absolutely.
I just like watch the prices of oil. You know, the Brent crude futures rose 58 cents to about $88, making their way close to $100. They're going up and down, oscillate. You know, this is gonna. The effect is not just going to kind of be curtailed to only the Ukraine and Russian border. It's going to affect the shipping lanes in the Gulf, in the Mediterranean, everywhere.
Well, oil prices are going up, Jamal, and one of the reasons his ratings are so low right now is because people feel economically that inflation is eating into any money that they may have had. So inflation is up. Not that everything goes by the stock market, but the last week has been the worst week for the stock market, in years and years and years.
And today we saw a seesaw in the stock market, dropping 1,000
under
points.
the Biden administration. And if oil continues to go up, and Americans are paying over $4 to $5 a gallon, we pay close to $5. The rest of the country, $3.50, close to $4 a gallon now. That's going to cause a lot of hurt.
Well, it's a simple formula. Listen to as far not just oil but gas. Russia is the largest producer of natural gas
in the world.
And you know who is the second country after that? Which is the second country? Is Qatar.
Qatar, yeah.
So if you cannot import gas from Russia because
You'll get it from
war,
Qatar.
You get it from Qatar at a higher price.
Much higher price. But I think part of what I was going to say in terms of the politics, if prices go up, then Biden's stock and ratings go down. This is back to this thing is like the Republicans will take the House, they'll take the Senate, and they'll be primed for taking over in 2024. But I think we should do a deep dive into the geopolitics of the Middle East, Jamal. This is something.
Well, who else is very nervous about this is Israel. It's all over Israeli news for two reasons. They're citing two reasons, of course. Israel, for many years, actually, since I would say the late 90s, they started shifting their policy towards Russia. So they have a lot of rapprochement. They're trying to kind of play this balancing act that they are neutral between Russia and the Ukraine. But there is a sizable Jewish population in the Ukraine, and recently the Minister for Immigration in Israel, he's been issuing these notices saying that we gotta prepare ourselves for a new wave of Ukrainian immigrants. There are a lot of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants who immigrated to Israel, but there are still left behind. And then so that's one thing that they're talking about without making any accusations or taking any position towards Russia or whatever, but they say that this is a major that could create a scenario for Israel that thousands of Ukrainian Jews or descendants of Jews may choose to immigrate to Israel. This is a statement was saying by Svetlova, said, calling on the Aliyah and Integration Ministry to prepare for their arrival. Aliyah is the immigration into Israel. And the other thing that they are nervous about is that the United States isn't going to have any time to deal with Iran. They are worried about now, this is a bigger problem. You have a bigger fish to fry. Therefore, the Iran talks will basically be put to the bottom of the pile of issues.
No, but it's a little more complicated than that, Jamal, but you're exactly right. Not that the Iran talks will be put to the bottom of the pile. It's the fact that the U.S.-Iran talks are continuing. And what the Israelis want is the United States to put it as the top priority.
We're continuing, but the United States is not going to listen to Israel and start now opening another front.
But that's my point.
Confronting the Iranians.
Right, but they're not going to stop.
They have an issue with
what
Russia.
The Israelis want, they want these talks to stop. They want pressure. They want them
big
to stop.
ask is really they've asked for many years the United States to bomb Iran. But I don't.
So here's the thing, Jamal. Who are the big allies of Russia in the Middle East and in the region? You have Iran is a big
Syria.
ally. Syria, parts of Iraq, and
Lebanon, Hezbollah.
Yeah, so you have you have this larger geopolitical proxy engagement, not just in the Ukraine with NATO and the EU, but also in the Middle East, also in Africa, also in Central and South America. This is a microcosm for a much larger division that's occurring in the United States. And China and Russia are forming more of an economic alliance. So this is why I think it's so big right now, and I think Biden sees that. Even though there's nothing he can do, Biden has a weak hand right now. But it has the potential. Here's the other thing, Jamal. If oil prices keep going up, that's going to strengthen the Saudi hand. It's going to strengthen the Emirates hand. It's going to strengthen all of the major oil producers, in a big way. And by the way, who else does it help, Jamal? It helps Russia. When the price of oil goes up, the Russian economy does great because that's their greatest contributor to their GDP is gas and oil. So that's why.
Here is a topic we've discussed before related to this. Jess, is the double standards. We started talking about this, right? This is what I was going to say. For example, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today told that about the issue. If Russia does invade the Ukraine, there will be massive consequences. He's talking. Then in another statement, he was talking about territorial expansion. In another statement, he was talking about human rights, and this is actually he ups the ante on human rights when he talks about China, and of course we agree with him, about human rights. However, when it comes, and this is the question, when it comes to Israel occupying the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, when it comes to the annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, this is, during the Trump administration, not only Israel is not criticized, but it's given the blessing of the United States.
The full blessing, Jamal, and that's why it's not even a double standard. I think it's a triple standard, to be quite honest with you, and the hypocrisy of the United States. This is why, we're witnessing kind of less unity and less kind of worry about the so-called superpower of the United States. We've been weakened, we meaning the United States, and its perception of the United States as a superpower that can't be defeated. It's great, people have to listen to the United States. Well, when you look at the triple standard, double standard, whatever way, that the Americans let Israel, the apartheid regime of Israel, get away literally with murder, expansionism, apartheid, loud threats, attacks on human rights. And we'll talk about this if there's time. You mean the Israeli military killed an American citizen, recently, and they won't be held accountable for that, a Palestinian American citizen, recently. So, why should anybody listen to Antony Blinken or the United States, extolling human rights and, protection of human rights and, confronting expansion when they just let it go free? This is why.
I tell you the answer. Maybe this is, I'm just being facetious here. It's a complicated problem.
Yeah.
When they talk about the occupation of the West Bank, they say, well, this is a complex problem. It's complicated. But then when they want to, anything that Israel does, it's
complicated.
It's complicated. But anything that the Russians do, it's not complicated. That's kind of like, they're invading another country, they're taking another territory. But it's complicated when it comes to invading also and violating the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria all the time. Israeli planes doing that, and it's complicated.
But actually, Jamal, you're bringing up a really good point, because in reality, it's just the opposite. When it comes to Palestine and the apartheid regime approach to what they're doing in Palestine, it's not complicated at all. They say it is, but it's not. When it comes to Russia, all of those issues we talked about today are complicated. And even though Blinken wants to say, well, it's just human rights, it's blah, 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 it's actually much more complicated than Blinken wants to let on to. And we've kind of just scratched the surface today in our discussion about how complicated it is historically, geopolitically. It's going to impact the world economy and the world politics. So, You're bringing up a really good point, because in Palestine, not complicated. When it comes to Ukraine and Russia, very, very, very complicated. Very, very
So I want
complicated.
to shift gears here and talk actually more about what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah, we should.
Just these reports, which I think they're not even complete, but we keep always citing reports, human rights organizations, talking about apartheid. This is a recent report by Israeli human rights organizations, not one, not two, not three, several actually, human rights organizations documenting Israeli settler attacks on Palestinians in 2021. And to tell you the truth, I was surprised to read the report and where it was published, because usually this is something that will be published in Haaretz.
Right.
But this time it was published in the Jerusalem Post.
That's
I
unusual.
have an issue with the Jerusalem Post because, they are usually follow the basically what the Likud kind of their or Netanyahu. I used to call them the Netanyahu paper or something like this. But anyway, 496 attacks by settlers, that several of those resulted in death and bodily injury and harm, attacks on women, attacks on children, that even the Israeli human rights organizations are disgusted by. I don't hear a single word from Anthony Blinken condemning this.
Where's
Because
Anthony Blinken?
you just kind of like made my
Right.
blood boil when you reminded me about the American citizen, Palestinian American citizen, an elderly person who was killed, who was blindfolded, and who was handcuffed with a zip tie.
I would say he was murdered, Jamal.
He was assassinated, basically,
Yes.
and left to die or killed and left, like they're trying to make up these claims. Oh, he resisted arrest and then we interrogated him and then we left him. He must have had a heart attack. Nobody, and you leave an old guy with his eyes blindfolded on his knees with his hands tied. They found him face down, dead. They didn't bother to call an ambulance. Let's say I'm just taking their story, saying, okay, maybe he died later, or, and this story is dead in the media. I don't hear
What do you mean
anything
dead, Jamal?
about this.
It was never alive in the media.
It was
never.
but I said, even, no one is talking about it. This is an American citizen. You're issuing today warnings telling American citizens in the Ukraine to leave. And this is an American citizen who was murdered by Israeli soldiers. And then you say, we are communicating, we're investigating. What are you talking about? You know where he died? Let me tell you something. Basically, it's about 5 miles away from, no, I should say 15 miles away from the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem.
Unbelievable.
So, what are you talking about investigating? You have a huge embassy there. You have a huge staff there. And we cannot even talk about it right here in the United States. And no one in the U.S. media is talking about it. And then at the same time, you're condemning Russian action.
Right. And that's such a great point, Jamal. I think that what's even more disturbing, nothing from Anthony Blinken, nothing from the State Department, and this American citizen's family is trying to get answers from the United States, and they have been stonewalled by the U.S. State Department as well as the White House. They're being stonewalled and not getting any information, not getting an investigation to an American citizen who is murdered by the Israeli military. Now,
And this comes on the heels of this report that I was talking about, 496, like let's make it 500 Palestinians have 500 attacks by Israeli settlers. Again, land grab going on a daily basis, no condemnation.
Anthony Blinken, where are you?
Exactly.
Anthony Blinken.
This is where the hypocrisy lies.
Yeah, and it's triple hypocrisy. Now, I do believe, just to bring it back to Russia, Russia's going to come out on top no matter what happens. That's why I think the Israelis are going to end up losers. in this geopolitical battle because they've hitched their wagon to the United States in such a way that this is going to have a lot of negative downstream effects. The implications here, even if the quote war, physical part of the war doesn't go forward. We've talked about this marathon, in terms of confronting Israeli apartheid and their human rights abuses. This tarnishing of the U.S. superpower, presentation and image in the United States is diminished and will continue to get diminished. That's only going to allow it and make it easier for the world community to confront the human rights abuses that the apartheid regime of Israel is doing. If it's coming from within, Jamal, like you said, if you had all of these Israeli human rights organizations coming out with these reports condemning these illegal colonial settlers' attacks on Palestinian civilians, if that's coming from within, that's part of the marathon that's being run right now.
Well, I mean, we cannot claim we are the bastion of democracy and human rights and so forth, and go to the United Nations and lecture China about its record on human rights and lecture Russia, which is terrible. And then at the same time, turn a blind eye when you have an American citizen murdered by Israeli soldiers, when you have 496 attacks by settlers. By the way, many of them are American citizens. We know that, right? So many of them are Americans who are attacking now innocent Palestinian civilians.
That's right.
And then the State Department doesn't say a word about this.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Jamal. And you have American citizens who are getting away with murder in other countries, killing other American citizens and getting away with it and not being held accountable either by the United States or by the apartheid regime. So I think that, this is part of what I'm saying, is that this long arc of history, Jamal, in terms of what's happening in the United States, we're heading into a period of time where there's going to be economic difficulties here in the United States.
We're seeing the economic difficulties. Perhaps with this, we should talk a little bit about the standing of Joe Biden. I think he's sinking in the polls every day. The economy is not doing well. The COVID is not doing well.
Inflation is out of control. Yeah,
the reaction to Russia, even that's a continuation to the Obama administration. It's a lot of things actually that affect
and if you want to talk
presidency and affect the Democrats next year.
I think that's exactly right, Jamal. That's why I made those predictions for this year, 2022. I hate to say it, but looks like I'm going to be right. But if you want to talk about Russia human rights and Russian human rights and Chinese human rights, what about American human rights, where the right to vote is being destroyed, for people who are economically, we commit our own human rights violations by the attacks on voting rights here in the United States too. So, it's good to be transparent. It's good that we're critical. But when I see Antony Blinken, it makes me sick to my stomach lecturing the world. And I'm telling you, Jamal, even though a lot of what he has to say may sound good and may sound right, people don't believe it anymore. And Putin knows this, by the way. And Xi Jinping knows this. And they know that the Americans are weak right now. And they know that Biden is weak right now. I think the only two countries that are really sweating it right now are the United States and the apartheid regime. The Israelis are sweating it right now because, they've hitched their wagon to, kind of a falling star right now. So, we shall see. But I don't see how Biden gets out of this, Jamal. I really don't. I don't know. Maybe you have some insight into this, but I don't see how he gets out of it.
Well, not if if he keeps going on the same path, because nothing has moved so far. He couldn't pass any of the things that he promised the American people that he was going to pass. He did some good, and I don't blame him all the way. I blame, of course, the Republicans for blocking that, and some
Democrats.
when you have from within your own party people who are against you. But also, he has not been very transparent about what's going on with COVID, with testing. That's also another fiasco. I've noticed
don't get me started.
Things have started to improve a little bit, because I was driving around and I saw a few testing centers just that you can get a free test.
But in reality, Jamal, things are not better. I mean, the spread in reality,
continues.
Where the Biden administration, I would give it a grade of C-, D+.
Well,
COVID.
You and I know what's going to happen at the end. Aside, even with the terrible spread of COVID and the people dying here, at the end of the day, and with all the international tension with Russia, Americans are going to vote with their wallets.
100%. They will get COVID when they go to vote, and they're
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the price of if gasoline is over $5 a gallon. If the loaf of bread has doubled,
which it has,
milk, when they cannot find
eggs,
consumer goods, that the shelves are empty, etc., that's going to be the deciding factor.
Right.
It's not, nothing else. And so far, he's gotten an F on this, and he has less than, as far as the party concerned, not about as far as his presidency, they have less than 6 months to turn this around. I don't think that's going to
happen. And part of the reason why it's not going to happen is because Putin, I'm sorry to keep going to how smart Putin is, but he knows this. He can drag out the Ukraine issue for 6 months. That's going to influence the midterm elections. And people have given up on the Biden administration's approach to COVID-19, Jamal. I know that you may see, or our listeners and viewers may see that, the tide has turned. Well, 3 states have seen a slight downtick in the number of infections. But the reality is, Jamal, more than 2,000 people are dying a day. And in the West, and in 20 states west of the Mississippi and some in the South, Jamal, we're still seeing outrageous infection rates for Omicron right now. Here in the West and here in California, even in Northern California, where you and I are, we're seeing hospitals coming apart at the seams. We're seeing healthcare workers who are totally burned out. I tell anybody who will listen to me, don't get into a car crash, don't have a bicycle accident, don't
take care of your health.
Don't have a heart attack right now. Because if you need to get to a hospital and see your doctor or get elective or emergency care, you're in trouble, frankly. And the long-term...
Something happens to me, just I'm coming, throwing myself in front of your door.
Ahlo sahla, you can come anytime, you know that. But my worry is that people are talking about... Right. People are talking about Omicron, but I'm telling you what I see in the trenches with my colleagues at UCSF.
Listen, I've read so many stories. I've heard stories of people having a heart attack and going to the emergency and the room, and they send them to another hospital, and then they died on the way. This is very common.
And this is in California. But Jamal, this is in California.
Including someone who was airlifted in a helicopter.
That's right. Yeah,
and he died on the way. If people are not aware of this, they live in La La Land, but we do have this issue.
And at the same time, Jamal, yesterday, you had a massive march in D.C. against the mandate. So, and again, we have a divided country. We have people who don't believe in masking. We have a country that doesn't believe in vaccines. We're still, if you look, 62% of Americans have only been vaccinated with 2 shots. Less than, maybe it's about 30% of people who are eligible for boosters have gotten it. We are so far behind. And listen, you just came from Europe. People in Europe, even though there are political differences in Europe, right? People People aren't acting this irrationally the way
But they have a
Americans do.
system. Just
They have a system. You can get
you
tested.
cannot go inside. You have to
Right.
get tested. They have testing sites everywhere.
We don't have that.
Here is the scenario. This is like, again, that we cannot even at the federal level make it mandatory that people, when they check in or they want to go into an airline, that they have to show their vaccination card.
We don't have
ask
that.
for it. Or to show that you have had a antigen test 24 hours.
Right.
Well, guess what? When you travel to the United States, that's a requirement.
Hello.
So when I flew to the United States, I knew the minimum thing. I couldn't set foot inside the airport without making sure that I had my negative test and I had my 3 shots and my passport, like the 3 items they needed for me to board and my boarding pass to board the plane.
Right. And
Well,
this is,
I flew to Washington, D.C., and then
Yeah.
I had to take a plane from Washington, D.C. That's the local to here. Nobody cared. I just walk
don't.
in. And so I was unable to tell that when I was on that second flight, like that who was vaccinated and who was not. Right. So
Well, that's exactly my point, Jamal. And this is why I think not only is our country divided politically, we're divided intellectually. I mean, I know that's a very harsh thing for me to say, but conspiracy theorists, white supremacists, and really kind of wacky people are given. I mean, you had a woman in the United States, this is, I think, in North Carolina, who said, if you make my child wear a mask, I'm going to bring all my loaded guns and weapons and I'm going to confront the school board. So, and you have still people who embrace what happened on January 6th when there was an attempt at a coup d'etat in the United States. We do not have our house in order here. So I'm sorry to keep going back to Putin. Is Putin going to take advantage of that? Yes, he already has. He'll continue to do it. That's why if we have to grade or we have to predict, who's going to come out on top, that's why I keep saying he's already won, we've already lost. I can't even imagine, Jamal, a scenario of Biden doing something where it's going to leverage in a positive way something good, because if he goes to war, it's going to be bad. And if he doesn't go to war, it's going to be bad. So Biden's in a lose-lose. Putin's in a win-win. It's not looking good.
you've been listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest episodes, and we will talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.